Hello, and welcome to The Hump with Katie Thiroux. I'm your host, Katie Thiroux, and I'm bringing you interviews with some incredible artists, finding out why are they so amazing, how did it all happen, and what can we learn from their journey. Before we get started today, I'd like to thank our sponsors. And first up, we have Jams World. Okay, by now you all must know how much I absolutely love Jams World. I'm wearing a Jams World right now. It's a clothing company that's been family owned and operated in Honolulu, Hawaii since 1964. And the reason why I love it is because when I'm up there performing on stage or even just playing at home, I run hot, and this fabric keeps you so cool and so comfortable because it's made from 100% spun crushed rayon. Plus, the art is so unique because it's real artwork that's screen printed right onto the fabric. Go to jamsworld.com and use the promo code JAZZ15 and you'll get 15% off your entire online purchase. That's jamsworld.com. Next up, I'd love to thank Colstein's. Colstein's is my favorite. It's my favorite string shop in the entire world. They're based in Long Island, New York. They actually just opened up their second location. And anytime I'm in New York City, I head on over to Colstein's to see what new things they're doing. They repair instruments, they make amazing double basses, they make their own strings and rosin. They do it all, and they're incredibly knowledgeable, kind, and sweet. If you go to colstein.com and use the promo code KATIE10, you'll get 10% off your entire online purchase, or give them a call and you'll also get the discount. That's colstein.com. I'd like to remind you that I'm bringing you brand new episodes of The Hump every Wednesday, every hump day. So download and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and go follow us on Instagram at The Hump with Katie. You don't want to miss a beat of what's going on over here. It is an absolute thrill for me to bring you our guest today, the great bassist, educator, and composer, Lynn Seaton. I'm such an admirer of his. He's just a fantastic bass player, and we had such a fun conversation together. I'm already ready to do part 2, so look out for that. And we talked a lot about his musical upbringing, and he shared some awesome stories about first night on Woody Herman's band or Count Basie's band. And he also really gives some amazing advice for younger musicians. So I think you're going to enjoy this conversation just as much as I did. So without further ado, here's Lynn Seaton. Cool. I'm just gonna dig right in, Lynn. You're one of my heroes, one of my inspirations. You're not old. I'll say that, but you have done so much in a short amount of time. So I'm kind of excited to hit a couple things. But I'd like to just kind of start at the beginning.
Well, thank you.
I'd like to start at the beginning because I read that you started on classical guitar when you were like 6 or 7 years old, which seems kind of odd to begin with, to start with classical guitar as a little kid.
Well, yes, that is true. It is not a rumor. I wanted to take music lessons, and I was very fortunate that there was a good music store near my house called Sade Music, which is still in business in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And my father said that he would take guitar lessons alongside me for a while until he learned to play San Antonio Rose, and he did that for about a year. So we took lessons together, and I continued in the classical guitar field. So
so you guys were taking lessons together at the same time?
Yeah, I mean, I was pretty small and little, and it was cool, a cool thing to do with Dad. And I did
awesome.
Want to take guitar. It had stemmed from the fact that I grew up in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and we took a trip to Mexico on a vacation. And in one of the markets there, my parents bought a tiny little guitar, an acoustic guitar, classical style guitar. So that's what we had. So that's kind of what led to things, I think.
That's awesome. And probably a nice bond to have with your dad doing that at the same time.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I've never actually thought about that. That's kind of cool. Learning something together. That's very cool. But then you picked up why the switch to bass when you were like 8 or 9. Again, that seems odd at that time too. It was like in the 60s. Now it's common for kids to start bass pretty young, but was that a common thing?
Well, I was very fortunate that in the Tulsa public schools that we had music programs. We had band directors and teachers and music education people and school orchestra. Mm-hmm. So there was a day, if you were interested, you could go down to the band room, and I went down and saw Mr. Roger Fenn, and told him that I was interested in playing the bass, and I've since made up for it, but I was pretty small for my age at that time, and they wanted me to start on cello, but I was, no, I want to play the bass. So they amazingly found a half-size bass in the Tulsa Public Schools district for me.
Wow.
And my father built 2 little wooden footstools for me to stand on. And they had one of the old bass stands, there was a big metal thing, and the arms folded out and held the bass on that. So that's how I started.
Oh, that's awesome. Again, that's like what people do now. Like they'll use like yoga blocks or something to manufacture how you can play as a young kid. But your fascination with the bass, did you see it first and then you were like, I have to play it, or did you see someone else play it?
It's possibly a combination of Paul McCartney and the popularity of the Beatles, and not realizing that bass, what he played on the records, was electric. I don't know. And our neighbor diagonally across the street from us, both the parents were in the Tulsa Philharmonic, the McNallys. So knowing that and being the same age as one of their children, we hung out a lot from the time, we were able to hang out. So I was in that environment that I knew people played music. So
yeah,
some combination thereof. I'm not honestly sure. So I went down to the band room and wanted to play bass,
Nice. And when you got the bass, was it, I have to practice this thing all the time? Was it like an obsession, or was it just like little by little?
Well, I was still playing some classical guitar and taking weekly lessons with that. I did like the bass, and we were in the school orchestra program of books called Mueller-Rush, and I think some people still use that. So I did practice, but mostly for what I probably needed to get done to get by.
Yeah.
And that was mostly the way it was at first. But I was in garage bands even from that time, first on guitar. It was a few years later that I got my first electric bass. But I was in a garage band playing guitar with my neighborhood kids.
I know, that's such a nice way to get started. I always feel like, even if you're playing sports or music, you've got other little kids around you and you guys are all like, yeah, let's go do this thing. And you don't really care like what it sounds like, or there's that accountability like, oh, let's all learn this song, or let's learn this new Beatles song or something and come back and play it together.
Exactly. So
yeah.
It was fun, and I had very tolerant parents that put up with us trying to play loud.
Yeah. Well, so when did you make, because I know you kind of gigged around town while you were still in high school, right?
Yeah, I was in a few other bands. I mean, I was in the public school music program, the orchestra, the stage band, and played for whatever musical happened each year. That was always fun. But yes, I was in bands outside of school as well. And one of them was a band of friends that were also in the school band, and some of my first actual gigs were with that group. It was a time that Blood, Sweat, and Tears in Chicago were very popular and huge. So we had a band with horns, and we did our best.
Yeah.
But when my father passed, and you're moving stuff out of the house, discovered a box of cassettes that he had recorded of the band. And of course we thought we were all hot and great, and we actually had gigs.
Yeah.
But I listen to the tapes now and I'm like, wow, not as good as I remembered.
Yeah.
But we were very sincere, and I learned a lot. So we played a couple of sock hops at school. There was a dance studio near the school for public called the Pink Barn, and they taught ballroom and popular dancing to people, and we played a few gigs there.
Oh, that's so important. Even I've been able to have that experience because there's like a resurgence of swing dancing in bands. And
Yeah.
I mean, because we'll talk about other things like Woody Herman, but if the band isn't cooking, the floor clears, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm so grateful. I mean, we are jumping ahead, but to the swing dance societies in New York when I was there playing for some of those things with some of the big bands, and of course here in Dallas, the Dallas Swing Dance Society. It's really neat.
It's super important because you learn about every tempo has a feel, has a dance to it, and we'll get to that because it's a great experience. So were you in high school? Were you playing jazz at all?
I started playing and getting some experience playing it in stage band, big band, but they called it stage band in those days. And my parents, my father only played guitar for about a year, but they loved music. And they took us to a lot of concerts. They took us to see the symphony. They took us to a series in the summer in Tulsa called the Twilight Series. And there were jazz concerts there. So that's probably where I first heard real jazz. But in high school, I wasn't, outside of school, really playing much jazz. It was, more rock and blues.
So let's get into that. You, after high school, you went to university.
Yeah, I'd like to jump back before I make that transition to college, though, because a couple of things were game changers for me in high school. Being in the stage band and listening to some music and hearing the blues. One of the garage bands that I was in, one of the people gave me a record called B.B. King Live at the Cook County Jail. And I'd always loved the blues. I loved the beat. I loved the shuffles, all of that stuff. And hearing improvisation in there, B.B. taking a solo, it was just mind-bending to me. Wow, how can someone make something up like that and tell such an incredible story? But that record had horns on it. So besides the pain and the brass stuff, this was the first time that I also really started connecting other music that I really liked and liked the beat with things that had horns in it and things that I was doing. So those blues were very important. There were also bands that came through Tulsa, a few of them, Buddy Rich and Kenton. There was a Tulsa Jazz Society. We would get some concerts from them. And they had a scholarship that allowed me to go to one of the Stan Kenton summer workshops.
Wow.
So that was in Drury. So I went there, and while there, I got to meet some of the people on the Kenton band. And years later, one of the people that was teaching at the camp was Dan Hurley, who became my colleague at Abersold and later here at North Texas. And Jay Saunders was teaching at the camp, and he was also a colleague here. But I also met the bass player who was in the band at that time named John Worster. And one of my favorite tracks then and still is a chart called For Better or For Worster. And John played so great on that. And Peter Erskine was on drums. And so I got to meet some of these people. Hank Levy was there, and who wrote many, that was my introduction really of odd meter charts. Not 3/4, not 4/4. Odd meter, I always felt strange about using that term, but I know it's common. So I got a lot of exposure to different things at this camp. It was really an amazing time for me. The music theory was so far over my head. I was completely lost. I had no clue what they were talking about with all these chords and all of that stuff. It was an amazing thing. But John Worster was extremely kind, and he found out I was from Tulsa, and he said, "Oh, we're going to be in Tulsa in a little while. We're playing a gig there, so would you like to come? I imagine I can get you in." I was like, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." So it turns out it was a wedding, and they were playing, I believe it was at the Petroleum Club. So he said, "You got a suit and tie?" Yeah. I said, "Okay, well, show up and just kind of act like you're with the band." And so I show up and got there, and he said, "I'm going to go talk to Stan and find out where you can sit, because it's a private party." I was like, "Okay, great." So he said, "Okay, come with me." And he grabs a chair, and he puts a chair on stage right next to him.
Wow.
So I'm sitting in the band, not sitting in with the band, but I'm sitting in the band. And I heard him play a gig from stage. That really was a game changer for me. I was like, wow, I think that's really when I decided I want to do that.
Wow. What an experience.
Incredible.
And what a time too, because I know my dad's born around the same time, and he didn't grow up in a major city, but same thing. Stan Kenton would come by. It was that time when Count Basie would come by, to like the college or the local high school. What an experience. That's amazing. So, and then you're also, you're in high school, but the people in the band are not that much older than you, right? Like,
That's true.
right? So it's kind of like, you maybe subconsciously, it's like, they're doing that, I can do that.
Yeah. I think at that time, maybe Peter Erskine was 17 or 18 when he joined the band. He was extremely young, but obviously extremely talented.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. I like those light bulb moments. What was the decibel meter sitting on stage with the band? Was that a new sound that you had never experienced before?
Well, definitely true. I mean, I played rock and roll, so what? Did you say something? So I'd heard loud music, but from the acoustic standpoint, I don't think I'd ever heard as much power. Mm-hmm. But the important thing talking about volume is that they didn't play loud all the time.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, that band and others and bands I've been on are known to be powerful. But one of the things that made that band and the Basie band when I was on it, and Woody's band and Fedchuk's band, Maria's band, a lot of the bands I play with sound so powerful is that sometimes it started with a whisper. Mm-hmm. And that old saying of how do you make a loud sound louder? Surround it with silence. Mm-hmm. And that was true. But yes, when they let go, my hair stood on end.
Yeah, and even like the softness and the loudness, there's that base layer of intensity. It's not just loud to be loud, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember when I joined the Count Basie Orchestra the first night, I knew some of the charts, very well, which is a good thing because there wasn't even music on a few of them. But even then, there were times that I could hear myself breathe. It was that quiet with 16 people playing at the same time. Unbelievable.
That's powerful.
Yeah. But then, for example, the classic Moten swing chart where the band comes in on the bridge, 1, 2, 3, bob, bob. Mm-hmm. That break, I knew it was coming, but it made me jump.
Yeah.
It was so powerful.
Yeah.
And I realized every night watching the audience playing that it made them jump too. Yeah. So it was always fun to watch.
Oh, that's cool. Well, good. I like that we filled in a little gap there. So, but you did end up going to college, right?
Yes, I attended the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma.
Nice. And did you finish your studies there?
I was done with my studies, but I did not get a degree.
That's fine. Yeah, no, I was just curious. So while you were there, because up to this point, had you had like a classical background on the bass at all?
I grew up taking lessons all my life, from guitar all the way down,
Yeah.
So yeah, in high school, had a wonderful teacher in Tulsa named Jim Bates, who's still playing and still teaching, and many of his students have come to see me at the University of North Texas as students and at summer workshops. And Jim is a wonderful player in the symphony, does the shows, plays the jazz gigs, everything. Mm-hmm. So just one of those consummate musicians, and really to this day one of the happiest, bounciest beats ever.
Oh, that's
and in
awesome.
college I studied with John Williams, who was the principal bass of the Oklahoma City Symphony and very influential on me. So yes, I did study. It's not like I didn't study all along.
And what was, because sometimes college, especially back in your time, you meet somebody and then, okay, there's an opening on this band. Like that's how it works. Were there some of those people that you went to school with that you saw later in life?
Well, absolutely. I still see some of them and still stay in touch with some of them. Particularly a group, we had a quartet called Oleo that we named after the Sonny Rollins tunes. Mm-hmm. And it was 4 of us that really wanted to learn to play jazz better. A couple of people had more experience. The leader was a great trumpet player, flugelhorn player, Stephen Fulton. And the drummer was Rich Thompson, and the pianist was Morris Nelms. And Morris and I were roommates quite a bit. So we formed this group, and the way I see it is this was the idea that we'd come together to learn the music music takes priority. So in the household with Morris, listening to music, jamming, it was all the time.
Mm-hmm.
We learned some tunes from together. We listened to records together. Within that group, we'd say, okay, check out this record, learn it, and then we'd play it. And there were gigs available. And I don't mean free gigs, I mean gigs where we got paid. And so there were gigs right there in Norman, there were gigs in Oklahoma City, and I was doing a few other things outside of that, but that group of four was an incredible time in my life because of the depth of digging that was going on for us.
Yeah.
Learning tunes, listening to records, constantly listening to records. And we would go and hear music whenever possible. If we'd get in the car and we'd drive down to Dallas or to the University of North Texas in Denton, you know, drive up to the festivals in Kansas and hear people. Clark Terry was one of Stephen's big mentors, and also to all of us, really. But we met him there, and it was an incredible time with those four people, and we're all still playing jazz. We've all made a life in jazz. Unbelievable.
Yeah.
Stephen lives in New York. His daughter is having great success, Champion Fulton. Wonderful singer, wonderful pianist, and Stephen plays with her a lot. Rich Thompson, you know, has played with many people, but he teaches at Eastman. And Morris Nelms is also here in Texas, and he just retired from San Marcos. So it's, incredible group of people.
Yeah, again, it's nice. It's almost that feeling of when you're a kid and you have that garage band, but now you're older, you know a little bit more, you know a little bit of what you want, but there's still that mystery of like, okay, how do we get this? So like even in college, what were some of your like most influential bass players, like your heroes at that time?
Well, at that time period in college and still in Norman post-college gigging, there was a club in Oklahoma City that we played sometimes called Bianca's, but they also had touring acts. So I met some of the bass players that became hugely influential to me. And some of those include Steve Gilmore, who was touring with Phil Woods, Stafford James, who came through, and David Friesen, and Major Holly, and Rufus Reed.
Wow.
All of those people are hugely influential to me. You know, I spent more time with some of them than others, especially Friesen and Rufus Reed and Steve Gilmore and Major Holly. But they all influenced me in different ways. But they were amazingly patient and grateful. I'm grateful for their patience and the time they spent with me. And how that time happened, of course, was when they were in town. It was spending time with them. Every time I'd go hear someone play, I'd say, can I buy you breakfast before you leave tomorrow? All that kind of stuff. Can I hang out? I was a pest. Totally a pest. I'd, offer to buy them breakfast, pay for a lesson, whatever it would be. And they are all very gracious.
Yeah, so, that's the best way to do it.
Yeah. At that club, Bianca's, long before we had cell phones and calls were free, it was expensive to make long distance calls. So this club had a Watts line, which was their business line, and you could make calls for free. And if you worked at the club and played at the club owners were very kind, and you could go in there and make calls. So I used to have phone lessons with all those people.
Wow.
And some of them, I had many, many, many lessons over the phone with these people. And unbelievable. And I can't tell you how grateful I am.
Wow, so that's pre-Zoom.
Oh yeah. I couldn't see what they were doing, but I could call and pester them with questions.
Yeah.
It was unbelievable.
That's very cool.
It was. So that led to getting a grant from the National Endowment for the Arts to go to New Jersey and study some with Rufus Reed. It was incredible. Now, another thing that happened, you were, I think, leading up to a transition of getting out of Oklahoma,
Yes.
is that I went to visit my sister who lived in Cincinnati, Ohio. And unbeknownst to me, one of the first ISB summer events was going on. And they had brought Francois Rabath.
Wow.
And it was the first time. So I went to visit my sister, just had no clue. And she said, oh, there's this bass thing going on at the University of Cincinnati at the CCM. And maybe you might be interested in going. And I'm like, yeah, sure. So I went and visited. And that's the first time I heard Francois Rabath. And that also changed my life. And I'd never heard someone play with such ease and skill. And then you realize how beautiful the music is. Then you realize, wait a minute, you can't do that on the bass. But he just did.
Yeah.
With such finesse and beauty and sound. So that was a big moment for me. So that was my introduction to the technique. I got the books, but at that time they also were way over my head.
Yeah.
So coincidentally, I also went to a jazz club with my sister and brother-in-law called the Blue Wisp Jazz Club. And while there, met Steve Schmidt, the pianist, and John Von Ohlen, the drummer. And they asked me to sit in. And I sat in and played a few tunes, and we had a really nice hookup. It just felt so good, and like, wow, this is great. So, I had business cards, and I gave him a card and said, hey, if you ever need a bass player, I'd love to play with you sometime,
Yeah.
So, looking to leave Oklahoma at some point, not sure what I want to do, call me. Well, 2 weeks later, they called me. Said, are you serious? I was like, well, yeah. So, I, on rather short notice, packed up all my cares and woes. There I go. And off to Cincinnati I went to take a house gig at the Blue Wisp Jazz Club.
That's awesome.
Which I did for 4.5 years.
Yeah, because did you have that in the back of your head? I know everyone's like, go to New York, you have to go to New York. Like was that something that weighed on you as well? Or was just like, I had a great experience with these people, let me try it out?
Well, at that point, I knew I wanted to give it a go to be a professional jazz musician. And how that would happen, going to New York at some point was definitely something I wanted to do. But this was an amazing opportunity. I wasn't ready for New York. I didn't know enough tunes. I had a good beat, but I was pretty green, I'm 23 years old, and I wasn't ready for New York. But the Blue Wisp experience helped me to be ready.
Yeah.
We had a house rhythm section. There was a big band one night a week. At first, I was only in the trio for the guest artists on the weekends, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But then I became the house bass player for the big band as well. And I did that for the last 4 years that I was there. So 4 nights a week, I played jazz in that club. And we had guest soloists every week. And at least twice a month, it was somebody of national or international stature, and the rest were local or regional.
Yeah.
All amazing players. So I got to play with a long list of people in styles, amazing styles,
Yeah.
One week it could be Scott Hamilton and Warren Bechet on one end, and then Joe Lovano on the other end, Charlie Rouse, Herb Ellis, Mark Murphy. I mean, it's unbelievable when I look back. So it's like, so that was my real graduate school.
Oh, of course.
It was amazing. And then I made my first jazz records, with the Blue Wisp Big Band. And I got to play with so many wonderful people and learn a lot of tunes and be forced to put the fake book down out of shame, I remember Von Ohlen.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I remember John Von Ohlen saying, man, how many times are you going to read that bleeping tune?
Yeah.
And I said, well, I don't want to mess it up. And he says, close the book, put it down, you know it. So I did, and I learned to trust myself, and it took a while, but, because I grew up reading music in the orchestra. That just was normal. I still am a good reader, and I do feel that you can play good jazz while you're reading music. If you are, but anyway, that helped me do that. So that was an amazing experience.
Those are great moments too. Like I always love it when I'm playing with somebody and they don't even tell me what they're gonna play, and so they just start, and it's almost even more exciting if I go, I don't know this song, maybe I've heard it once, and so you just listen once through, try and figure it out really quickly, and then you try and go for it, and hopefully the piano player is playing clearly.
One would hope.
Yeah.
But we have to play on the downbeat, so
yeah,
that is
I know. You got to make a choice.
Use the word exciting.
Yeah, it's thrilling, it's terrifying, it's exciting.
Yeah.
I do have just a question about the Francois Rebath, because your technique is incredible, and you have such an individual, unique sound.
Thank you.
So when you saw Rebath, how much were you practicing to get that technique? And I don't care if it was 8 hours or 1 hour, it doesn't matter. I'm just kind of curious at that time.
Well, talking about big practice things, I've had 2 huge practice blocks in my life. Mm-hmm. One was still in Oklahoma, and I have to talk about that. I had played bass all my life, but at some point I said, I think I really want to give it a go. Mm-hmm. And there's so much I don't know. So I had a good fortune to play in a blues-based rock band called Zebek, which I joined after the unfortunate accident of the bass player before me passed away in a car accident. Mm. And I got the gig, and they were well established in Oklahoma. We'd play a week in a club, a week in another club in different small towns in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And it was a full-time gig. And they were already successful when I joined them. They had a whole circuit. So I played that band for a year, and I saved up some money. I quit the band, and I moved into a friend's garage who had a garage apartment above it. Mm-hmm. And I had free rent. And for about 6 months, I hit the shed. Mm-hmm. And I was playing jazz and playing with my friends, and the person that was upstairs was a guitar player named Randy Neal, and we'd play a lot. I left the bass out right there. Yeah. So I'd wake up and Lynn, play me. And I knew some things that I made a list of things that I had to do. I didn't keep a practice log. I've never done that per se. I mean, I know what I need to practice, and to this day there's stuff sitting on my stand waiting to be played. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I practiced a lot. Mm-hmm. Then getting to the Rebath technique, I mean, the stuff that Rufus Reid gave me from the NAA grant was a huge thing for me. Mm-hmm. The technical stuff that he had me do, and the big one of writing bass lines. Mm-hmm. How do I get from this chord to that chord? Yes, transcribing was very important too. Learning classic bass lines off of records, or now we have lots of books of pre-transcribed things. Those are very beneficial too. Mm-hmm. But Rufus had me write pages and pages of bass lines. Mm. How do you get from here to there? And it was so helpful for me, It was like before we had these phones with apps that told us how to get where we had to go. We had to know how to get there, not just be told turn right, turn left. It's very similar to playing through changes. Mm-hmm. How do I get there? How do I go the scenic route? So I can't thank Rufus particularly enough for some of that, you know. But regarding the Rebath technique, a little later I was on the Count Basie Orchestra. We went to Paris, and we were there for 2 weeks, and at the Club Lionel Hampton, and I got brave, and I found Francois Rebath's phone number, and I called him up and invited him to the gig. So he said, sure,
Wow.
And he said, you want to come over to my house for dinner? And I said, sure. And he was teaching some lessons at that time, and with the permission of the student, I was able to observe. Mm. And he had said to me, I see you playing across the strings and stuff. You should really check out some of the things in my technique. Mm-hmm. And I said, I've had your books for a few years, but I don't know where to start.
Yeah.
You know? So he showed me some of the basis of the pivot, starting with the C major scale at the heel, with the pivot back and everything closed. And then he showed me the same thing with the thumb on the C on the G string.
Yeah.
And that was how it started for me. I began to see. So regarding what and how to practice, I'm on the road full time. We traveled out of the 52 weeks, we've traveled 45 weeks a year. So my practice was in the room, or after setup, I'd go with the setup crew sometimes and play in the hall, sometimes jam with Dennis McCrell, the wonderful drummer and friend. But anyway, I would practice in my room. But because this stuff was so new and so weird, when I used that technique, I didn't sound very good.
Yeah.
So I would go to the gig and play my old technique, and then I'd go practice this new stuff. And I know it sounded awful because the people that had a room next to me told me so. But bit by bit, I said, okay, here's how I can negotiate a blues with this new technique. So I'd go to the gig and I say, okay, first chorus or one of the choruses, I'm going to use this pivot and play it. And like, oh, nope, back to the old one. And then eventually it's like, oh, I made it through.
Yeah.
And then at one point, I realized I had done it without planning on doing it. That's when I know it started to happen.
Yeah.
So yes, it taught me the fingerboard in ways that I never dreamed. Because I didn't study extensively with Roboth in person, although I feel a huge, deep connection to him.
Yeah.
I also explored some other scalar and modal things and arpeggiation things, taking what I had known about the technique in some other modes than are in his books.
Yeah.
I'm not the only one to do that from the jazz world, but it really helped me.
Yeah.
So that period there on the road, again, about another 6 months of intense, making sure I did it every day, were big ones.
Yeah, and what a cool opportunity. You had real life experience to try it on in like one of the spotlight, right? Like a huge spotlight to try it on.
Absolutely.
So how did you get from playing in the Blue Wisp Big Band, that amazing experience, to then you went to Woody Herman's band before Count Basie, right?
Yes. Well, the Blue Wisp Big Band was the first place that I made some jazz records. And some of those records made it to the national charts, you know. And with all of the guest artists that we had, they would play with the big band on Wednesday, and then Thursday, Friday, Saturday, they'd play with the trio. So it was a lot of veterans from all over the country, East Coast, West Coast, veterans of Basie, Ellington, Woody, Buddy, unbelievable. And of course, Von Ohlen was ex-Kenton and ex-Woody, ex-Billy Maxted, you know. So Phil DeGreg, a wonderful pianist and educator, and Jim Rupp was the drummer on the Basie band at the time. He's also from Ohio. They knew me, and we had played some together. So with Woody's band, the way it worked is that people would pass around tapes on the bus. And so there was a pool of contenders for any available opening.
Yeah.
And I was one of those. So when they needed a bass player, my name came up, and recordings of the Blue Wisp were passed around. And of course, a couple of people actually knew me, so that helped. And I got the call. And I was honestly hesitant to go out because I'm playing at the Blue Wisp 4 nights a week. I had a swing-oriented band every Tuesday night at a club literally 1 block from my house called Arnold's, with Katie Lauer and Buck Pfeiffer, clarinet player, and Ted DuPont, wonderful stride piano player, playing a whole nother set of music.
Yeah.
So I'm playing jazz 5 nights a week with high-level professional players that were better than I was. So I was like, why do I want to go on the road with a bunch of college kids, you know?
Yeah.
But Von Ohlen said, man, you got to do it.
Mm-hmm.
That's a whole nother thing to go out there and do the consistency of what's on the road.
Yeah.
You know, and it's some of the greatest music ever. And I'm so glad that he convinced me I should go, you know, because I'm a homebody.
Yeah.
I spent 16 years on the road. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
But I did, you know.
Yeah.
So I'm really glad I went. And I went out on the road and met the band in Battle Creek, Michigan. And I actually met the band at the Detroit airport, but that's a whole nother story. But it was an amazing experience, you know.
I like too. It seems like everyone I've talked to who's been in one of Woody's bands, it's like the band chooses the new person. It's not like Woody chooses the new person. He fires the person.
Yes.
But it's like a group decision, right?
Yes, it is. You know, so that's pretty cool.
And who was playing drums when you first were with Woody's band?
Well, let's see. I think Dave Miller.
Okay.
No. It was Rupp. Rupp came and went. Rupp was there my first night. And then he left and Miller came back. He and Rupp kind of traded chairs for a while. And Jeff Hamilton came on a few times. But Rupp was there my first night. How could I forget that? Because of my interesting first night, you know, which I'll tell you the story if you'd like to hear it.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, and the Chicago Brad Williams was playing piano. There's a Brad Williams here in Dallas, also a fine piano player. Both of them are. So that was the rhythm section. But yes, I'll tell you about my first day on the band. I got the call, and obviously when they need someone really soon. So I packed up, again, all my cares and woes, and I didn't really have a decent suitcase, but my first time I went out on the road, you have to take all these clothes, you know, because you're not coming home for a while. So I ended up using my father's Navy trunk, you know, a Foot Locker. That was what I had my clothes in. And I had to go get a hard case for my electric bass, you know, and didn't have a case for my upright, but bought a seat for it at that point in time. And I flew out to Detroit to meet the band. And so I'm on a separate flight, obviously. And they said, well, when you get to the Detroit airport, you go outside and you'll see a section for just buses. Our bus will be out there. And I was like, okay, thanks. You know, well, Woody didn't have a bus with Woody Herman band on the side. It was a rental bus. So I have my amplifier, I have my electric bass case, I have my upright case, I have a suitcase, and I had a separate little amp bag. So all this luggage, but fortunately it was all on wheels, you know, because I had a cabinet that I played for years and years and years that was self-contained road case with wheels, but I had to put other stuff around it. So, and I had a bass wheel. But anyway, I come out of the airport, and there's a whole bunch of buses out there. So I'm going to each one with all my stuff. Is this the Woody Herman bus? No. Is this the Woody Herman bus? No. So I finally found the bus, and I get my stuff on there. But no one else is on the bus. Turns out the band's flight was late, and we had to get from Detroit to Battle Creek, Michigan. So they finally come in, and we're cutting it to the wire. So everybody gets on the bus. The driver puts the pedal to the metal, you know, and we're driving as fast as he could, which is faster than he should. And we get to it, and we were playing in a hockey rink in Battle Creek, Michigan. So we get there and we set up. Of course, Woody often traveled separate from the band, so he was already there. So we set up as quickly as we could. Some of the people go into the dressing room, and one of those was Jim Rupp. Woody had a whistle around his neck, and one of those famous charts called Woody's Whistle. And when it was time to call the troops and get people together, he'd blow the whistle. So it's time. I mean, it's maybe, I don't know, a few minutes past downbeat time. And so I'm up on the bandstand and I'm ready to go. And Woody turned around and said, "Well, if we had a drummer, we could at least play some small group tunes, you know?" So he gets on the mic and he goes, "Jim, rup, I need a drummer. And Jim's in the dressing room going, "Oh no." So Jim throws his uniform on, when our uniform was basically the look-alike t-shirts and blue jeans. So he runs out and climbs up on the bandstand, and the rest of the band comes on there. And no one had told me how things go down at the start of a show. What happens? So they get in place, and Woody turns around to Jim and goes, "Roll 'em!" And Jim, so I look in the book, and what I'm about to tell you took maybe 10 seconds, but it felt like hours in slow motion. I'm looking for "Roll 'em."
Oh,
And
yeah.
so Jim's rolling, and he sees that, and he said, "No, the theme." And now I'm looking for the theme.
Yeah.
He's like, "No, Blue Flame.
Yeah.
And, and then he said, "Just play a B flat." Finally, Woody, but I did that.
Yeah.
But all that took such a short time, but it was like, what a panic way to start. And of course, there's no chart for it anyway.
Yeah.
Thankfully, I knew it, but just your brain in those situations, you're like, what?
Oh, yeah. That's terrifying. But how nice of Jim Rupp to help you out, at least.
Oh.
Not everybody would have done that.
Yeah. Well, he's laughing. He still laughs about it. Loves telling that story.
Yeah, some people kind of like it. Sorry, some people kind of like it when you fall on your face.
Oh, well, that's definitely true.
Yeah.
So, another first night story. People can, test you in different ways. Some do it with love, some do it on the other end of the spectrum, and some, it seems like it was cruel. And one of those interesting moments for me was someone had told me, "Look, you get a shot, you play, and if it's not working out, then Woody will go like that, So about the second or third tune, Woody goes like that. And I was like, man, I haven't even made it through the first set, and I'm fired. It turns out Woody goes, "That's the one."
Wow.
That's what he's the one. So, but I thought not.
Meanwhile, you're playing through the rest of the gig. I'm fired.
Yeah, that's exactly.
Wow.
And then another funny thing, someone had told Woody that I sing and bow at the same time, but I didn't know he knew. And back in those days, the PA we carried had these Shure microphones, very similar to the Beta 56A that I use in the bridge of my bass, that have a bendable head. But when you take them out, they kind of look like a gun,
Yeah.
because the head's pointed to you. So Woody's doing it, and we're doing a blues, and Woody had it in those days, he was getting up there and had his little shuffle walk.
Yeah.
And he's looking right at me, and he's walking towards me, and he pulls that mic out. Looks like he's pointing a gun at me. He goes,
Yeah.
"Sing."
Oh my gosh.
So I started singing.
Yeah.
So it was kind of fun. But obviously things worked out.
Yeah.
Worked
Oh,
out quite well.
that's amazing. And I'm sure, again, there was band members who came in and out, some amazing players, and also some amazing guest artists as well.
Oh, yeah.
But so that was, you guys were bussing it mostly, right?
Yes, we were.
So, and I think people don't understand nowadays what that really meant. Like sometimes you were driving at night, right? Trying to sleep on the bus.
We were very fortunate in that period that we did not have to do hit and runs except once in a while. We always had a hotel, almost always. I'm so thankful for that.
Because I've heard stories of people like sleeping up in the carriage.
Oh, yeah.
If you were
people
tiny
did that
enough, you
anyway.
could. Yeah. Yeah.
Not me. The whole thing would come down, but yeah.
Yeah. But what an experience to play almost every single night, right? And in a big band. It's different than a small group.
Absolutely. I like doing both, but
Yeah.
wow, to get that because there's some amazing players on that band. The band was pretty stable. I mean, we did have a couple of changes in the drum chair and a couple of horns, but it was pretty stable most of the time. And the nice thing is that that 50th anniversary record, I did get to play on that.
Yeah.
So very happy that that's out there.
And so then, I don't want to take up too much more of your time, but I know you went to Count Basie's
I'm
band.
happy to spend the time. I mean,
All right.
today I have a big break from teaching right now, so I'm open. I don't even know what time it is, but
Fabulous. That's great. So then how'd you make your way to Basie's band? And was Basie, I didn't have the timeline so right. Was Basie still around at that time, or was?
he was not. He had passed
Okay.
about 6 months earlier.
Okay.
But the band, except for me, was the same. Thad Jones had taken over. There'd been a few people, some people internally that they had going, but they had hired Thad to lead the band. So I actually was with Woody still, but my friend from Woody's band, Jerry Pinter,
Oh yeah, I know Geri.
yeah, good friends with McCrell. And Jerry said, man, whenever we get to Reno, you got to play up with my friend Dennis McCrell. It'd be great. So we finally got a gig in Reno with Woody, and we hooked up a jam session. But the only time we could do it, because we played really late, and was the day we left. So we had to set up a jam session at like 8 a.m., but we did, because we wanted to play. And he was right. I loved playing with Dennis McCrell. It was an amazing feel. So Dennis was like, we got to play, so we will play. So I'm like, yeah, great. So it turned out later they needed somebody on the Basie band, and Dennis recommended me. I happened to be home from a tour with Woody, but I literally was leaving to go out the door, and the phone rings, and I said, okay, I'll answer it. I mean, I had my stuff in the elevator, and it rang, and it's like, may I please speak to Lynn? Yeah. Hi, this is Thad Jones. I was like, yeah, right. Hi.
Yeah.
I thought it was a joke. So he offered me the gig, but I actually turned it down that day because I literally was walking out the door to start a 2-month tour with Woody. And this was near the end of Woody's touring days, where, if people aren't familiar with it, he had some financial trouble that one of his managers cheated him and didn't pay his taxes. It's a long, long, sad story. But we thought possibly this could be the last tour that Woody may do, and I couldn't miss it. And I told him that. So he's like, well, thanks, but we need someone right away, So hung up the phone, said goodbye, went out and started the tour, and I was like, wow, can't believe that. Because as much as I love Woody, the Basie thing was a dream,
Yeah.
So he called back and said, left a message on my phone machine, and this was back in the days when you had a little tone dialer, and a little device, and you'd pick it up and you put it over the mouthpiece of the hotel phone and dial your passcode to get into your voice messaging, and then you'd listen to your voice messages. So he called back and said, I really appreciate your sense of duty. Would you be interested if we can get somebody until you can come? When would that be? And I was like, really? So I said, the tour ends blah, blah date. Left a message. He calls back. We found somebody. We'll send you a ticket. You got to start so-and-so day. He said, are you going to be in New York? We got to get your uniforms, because the Basie, we had 2 suits. So, yes, happened to be going to New York at that time, And I went to the shop and got fitted for suits, and it happened. So I finished the gig with Woody, and I flew to meet the Basie band. I started the next day at the Montreal Jazz Festival with the Count Basie Orchestra.
And that must have felt amazing, Thad Jones rearranging, their agenda to have you come and play.
What do you mean Thad Jones rearranging their agenda?
I mean, like he was like, okay, we'll just get someone for 2 months, and then you can come.
Yeah, well, that was very kind, and it was based on McCrell's strong recommendation. So
Wow.
eternally grateful to that man, both of them. So yeah, that was an amazing time. So I flew to Montreal, no rehearsal, went out and played the first set.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure it was music you knew very, very well.
Well, thank God, because out of a 1-hour set, I think there were 5 tunes that there was no music for.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I'd never played a big band song like that without music.
Yeah.
So, but when they call the set and you're looking for the charts and it's not there, or you pull up some piece of paper that looks like the dog chewed on it, and it's only the first page, it's just got a name on it,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and you realize, yeah, but I had to do it. So
Yeah, exactly.
but it obviously worked out.
So why did you go from the point, I'm sure all along you're playing, small group trio things as well, like on the side. So after you left Basie's band, I know you played with Monty Alexander for a little bit as well. And I'm also curious, you played with a number of vocalists. Oh, that's the cat. That's the jazz cat.
Hi, Jazz Cat. Yeah, I love playing with vocalists.
Yeah, so I know you play with Ernestine Anderson, and I'm not really sure in what capacity, if it was a small group or big band, but Nancy Wilson and Tony Bennett. So for you, I'm curious, what do you like about playing with vocalists? Do you have a different take as opposed to playing, with a big band or a trio or something?
Well, with the vocalist, the focus is on the song. Mm-hmm. And as much as I like to blow and stretch out, I like songs. Mm-hmm. And, I'm a bass player. I don't know the lyrics like I should, but it's nice to be in a company of people that do. Mm-hmm. I also like the fact that they often play verses, and the dynamic factor is so important in any kind of music, but sometimes in our instrumental playing, we don't have as much emphasis on the dynamic presentation.
Yeah.
As I found with some of the great singers that I've been blessed to work with, that's part of it. That's just as important as the song, is how do we present this? And that's one thing I love about it. It's also, you play it in the key that's appropriate for the singer.
Yeah.
So whatever that is, And then many of the great singers have a nice book with great framework for these great songs. And some of them might be anything from a trio, quartet, all the way up to a full-blown orchestra, pops concert, big band, anything in between. So I like presenting my music in the framework of stuff, even in a trio.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's nice too. I feel the same way about singers. There's a different presentation, a lot of different songs that it might be something from the same, a lot of jazz standards, of course, come from Broadway musicals, but they might pick a different one than we're usually used to. And again, the verse is nice because it gives it some context. And you also, you played in Jeff Hamilton's, his first trio, which some people call the Beard Trio.
Yeah. Technically, I don't think it was his first
No, it
trio,
wasn't his first trio, yeah, but the Beard Trio with yourself, Jeff Hamilton, and Larry Fuller.
Yes. Yeah, we were together with that trio for 4 years, and we worked a lot. And it was, Monty was a couple of years also. That was incredible too, and a lot of that was with Duffy Jackson. Wow. But with Jeff's trio, we knew about each other because of John Von Ohlen back at the Blue Wisp, who was one of Jeff's mentors. And Jeff was a person that when the Woody Herman band needed a drummer, they'd call him. And if he was available, he'd come back out and play a little bit. So that happened, and we got to play. And there was also another amazing hookup. So Jeff had started his trio, but decided to make a change in the bass chair. So I got the call, and it was incredible 4.5 years of my life. The first 4 years with Larry, and then the last 6 months of that with Tamir Hindelman, who is still there.
Yeah. Yeah, and you guys must have I know you guys made some amazing recordings, did a lot of touring and traveling.
We did. I mean, from my memory, I'd have to look at the calendar to confirm, but I think we were on the road at least 6 months every year.
That's a lot. Even that was like the early 2000s, right?
Late 90s.
Late 90s. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot of touring for a trio to be doing.
It wasn't like 6 months block.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, although I did once in my life go out for 6 months without coming home, but that was an earlier time.
Yeah. And I know, so you described yourself as a homebody, and you put your time in 16 months on the road. And were you able to like keep up your familial relationships and friends and things like that while you're on the road?
Yeah, I'll elaborate a bit on that. Mariana, my wife, and I have known each other and been together since 1980, married in 1986. But when I asked her to marry me, it was in the middle of the time there with the Basie band. And literally 45 weeks a year, I'm gone. And we were friends with some other people in Cincinnati, obviously. And amongst those friends were a couple of jazz DJs, Frank DeFury and Bob Nave. And so they kind of took care of Mariana, and she hung out with them a lot and would still go to jazz clubs. So some people that didn't really know Mariana and came into our lives a little bit later when she announced she was getting married thought she was going to marry one of them. Oh. Hilarious.
Yeah.
But yes, it worked. It takes a special kind of partner to put up with our selfishness.
Yeah.
Of being an artist sometimes, I really believe, you know. Still eternally grateful.
Yeah.
We did have a son, Aubrey, who's now in his mid-20s, you know, so I did get very homesick.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So.
But I mean, especially when you're on the road with, 16 to 20 other people, it can almost feel isolating, even though you're with other people too.
Yeah. True, but
yeah,
it's a whole nother thing. I mean, I don't know if a psychologist has ever done a study of life.
Their brain might explode.
There's
a lot going on there.
A fascinating time, and even with the trio, the dynamic of what happens. It's a wonderful, wonderful experience, but it's very different. I've been lucky that in that group with Jeff, I mean, we were close.
Yeah.
And I still speak occasionally to Jeff and Larry and Jameer once in a while too. So it's a small world. I still have fondness, we parted in good ways,
Exactly.
Thank goodness.
The last thing I wanted to ask you about, or maybe two more things, but
Sure, whatever you need.
You're very well recognized as an educator in the bass world, and probably beyond the bass world, and the jazz world for sure. When did you, I assume that you like teaching because you've teaching for a long time and you have a lot of great students. So when did that kind of come into play? Like, oh, I could teach. I like this. How did that start?
Well, I honestly didn't remember, but it turns out that I've been teaching since I was 13 years old. So I was honored to be inducted into the Oklahoma Jazz Hall of Fame. And at a separate ceremony at the church that I grew up in, some members came, and the minister, John Wolf, made a nice presentation and all of that. And then they had a little Q&A, and I was teaching at North Texas at that point in time. And people asked me questions. So one person said basically the same question there. I said, when did you start teaching? And I was like, I don't really remember.
Yeah.
And they said, I know exactly, because you taught my kid. You were 13 years old. You started giving him lessons. I was like, wow, really? So I guess I've always taught, and I still believe that most of us can learn from someone that knows even just a little bit more than us, and vice versa. And we should help those that know or have a little less experience than us. But yes, I do love to teach. I hope it shows.
Oh yeah, and again, you had those experiences of, Major Holly coming into town, Rufus Reed, and just those little, even if it was 5 minutes and you asked them a question, they gave you the time, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's so important. And I mean, I grew up the same way. Anybody would come to town, anything like, is this a good fingering? Or it didn't matter. It was just, and it just meant so much that they took the time to help me.
Yes. How lucky we are. So
Yeah.
fortunate. But it also, you had to be a little bit brave to go up and ask those people, didn't you?
Exactly.
That's a part of it. You don't ask, you don't get.
Definitely.
Still might not get it, but if you don't ask, you'll never know.
Yeah. And then the last thing I wanted to ask you is, you've had a couple recordings under your own name, your own trio. It's ironic now that you had a record called Zoom Blues, and it could actually be like a national anthem right now for what we're all going through being on Zoom. I don't know if there's some way we can make that happen, but and I'm sure it has nothing to do with Zoom.
No. The backstory behind that is that the late great pianist Paul Tillotson talked about, when I do the singing and the bowing, that he called it Zoom Zoom Scat. So when I played the tune singing it or not singing it, Okay. And actually the two times I've recorded it, one released and one I'm hoping to release soon, is a live version from my last ISB concert.
Oh, cool.
With Bill Mays and Tim Fronczak. But then the previous release, I didn't sing on it then either, amazingly enough. But it was written for that. So Paul put on his record that we did, Lynn Seaton, bass and Zoom Zoom Scat.
Okay.
And a small publication reviewed it. Well, it got reviewed more than that, but one small publication cited that and said on this tune, Lynn Seaton plays Zoom Zoom Scat, an instrument of the electronic era reminiscent of the scat singing of Louis Armstrong.
Wow, what an interpretation.
Yeah, he thought that I was playing an electronic instrument.
Wow,
Hilarious.
because of your voice.
Yeah.
Interesting. Well, it could be a new instrument. You can patent that.
Yeah, one never knows. Well, I guess
Yeah.
I could sample it.
Yeah. That's cool. So that's a project that you'd have coming out then, this ISB recording?
My son Aubrey Seaton is a wonderful sound engineer, and we were sent the recordings, multi-tracks from the ISB concert that I was thankful to be and honored to be a featured artist at the last convention. And it was really well recorded. The performance was a lot of fun, and Aubrey has just sent me his initial mixes, and I actually have them here. I don't know if you want to hear one, but I could do that if you'd like. But anyway, I'm not sure what and how to do in this day and age. We did, with that same trio, I had a feature performance several years ago, and we did release that too. But in this time, I'm not sure releasing an album as a leader. It's a different game now.
Yeah.
I don't know if you put out a CD or just a few CDs to send for the press and make it all digital. I'm not sure how that works.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of who knows right now, but I'm sure everyone would love to hear the music. Actually, maybe I'll might have you just play a little clip of it. I lied. I have one more question. I know you gave me some memorable moments about like first nights on bands. Is there any moment in your career that stands out as it could have been good or bad? Any sort of moment on the bandstand that stands out to you?
Well, I mean, my favorite gig is always the next one, and I hope there will be a next one.
Yeah.
I've been a hermit in this COVID time. But yeah, there's been some nights that things really worked, and things were pretty magical on every situation that I've been in,
Yeah.
But one does stand out for me, going back to the Basie band, since we just talked about it, that's fresh on my mind. we were playing the Playboy Jazz Festival. Thad was leading the band, and Joe Williams was returning as a guest to sing with the band. And of course, you know, he's got all those great famous charts that the Basie band recorded with him, and they're amazing. They're amazing. So we did, you know, Walk On Every Day. That's one of the greatest walk-on intros for anybody. You know, it's got that big intro, and it goes into the little turnaround vamp so they can announce Joe, and he walks out and takes the applause, and then every day, boom, we're in. So a great way to start. So we did a couple of the charts, and then Joe turns around and said, blues, B flat, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, bang. And we just, what are you gonna do? You start playing. Yeah. So we did, but there's no chart, you know? So he starts singing a blues, and Thad, section by section, went over and taught them and made up a chart by playing parts, pieces. So you play, your section plays, you play some fills, you know, and then everybody all together like a shout chorus and make it big. That was a highlight.
Yeah, I know it's like seeing someone build like a spaceship from the ground up with nothing, no blueprint or anything. I've heard stories like that too, where the Thad Jones, Mel Lewis music didn't make it, you know, to Europe on the first night. So he would do that every night, and what an experience to see him do that. That's amazing. Yeah. That's very, very cool.
It was fun.
Well, Lynn, I think I've exhausted. Well, I do have one more question.
Sure. I mean,
maybe I know a lot of younger musicians might struggle with inner criticism, you know, while they're playing. How do you, it's kind of hard to, in a broad base, to address that, but how do you help some of your students if they're kind of beating themselves up all the time with their practice or after a performance or something?
Well, I say often that you care, and that's a good place, that you care about yourself, you care about the performance, you care about your playing. So if you didn't give a hoot, then what would that get you?
Yeah.
You wouldn't be doing what you do. So a few things. One, it's good that you understand you're at a certain level. It's good that you want to be at a different level, and you aspire to that, and may that always continue. As soon as you stop wanting to grow, it's over.
Yeah.
So the other thing is remember, in the game of life, it's not a race. People learn in different ways. People grow in different ways, and also they learn and grow at different paces. When one is in school, there are deadlines that must be met in often sequential order to get that piece of paper. That's one thing. But if we cannot judge our personal progress in the context of others, that helps. The other big thing that I always say is always remember that childlike wonder of the first time that you played a bass and you went, boom. That's the coolest thing I've ever heard in my life.
Yeah.
And remember that time if you got your own bass or you loaned a bass, how cool that was. Always remember that childlike wonder, because when we learn more and we learn more, obviously we realize sometimes there's more and more that I don't know.
Yeah.
And sometimes that impedes our ability to make music. But when we think about delightful conversations in life, some of the most fun conversations that I've ever had have been with little children. And it was some of the best times ever. And they didn't read all the books that I read. They haven't listened to all the records that I have. They haven't heard all of the eloquent speakers. But man, I had a great time talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
So don't let what you don't know or what you do know interfere with your ability to make music with what you are, who you are right now. Don't let your expectations get in the way of accepting what happens on the bandstand.
Wow, that was really well put. That was great.
Thank you.
That was awesome, Lynn. I think we'll have to do a part 2, maybe with some Woody Herman members like Jerry Pinter and Ron Stout. And
My brother from another mother back in the day, Ron and I looked a lot alike. And
I was thinking that might have been a possibility.
yeah, well, yeah, some people would come up and say to me, they would say, "Ron, you sounded great," and I'm like, "Thank you."
Yeah.
Get tired of saying, "No, that was this other person." So.
Yeah, just let it happen. Well, yeah, that actually sounds like fun. Well, thank you so much, Lynn. This was, man, I learned so much. Thank you so much for sharing some of those amazing stories. And I'd maybe love to do this again a couple months down the road.
I'd be happy to do part 2 because, we haven't really talked about the transition into New York and out of New York and all of that stuff and getting to Texas. But
exactly.
But anyway, thank you so much. I love this series. It's really great what you're doing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's fun. And like I said, it's people, they want to help. I love, like we had Rufus Reed on, and it's nice. I feel it's important for other people to hear what you all went through, because you all came up at a different time, different experiences. I love it. Thanks, Lynn. Continue to be safe and healthy. And I'll see you next time.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye.